And now, two guys who survived running with scissors, Aaron and Jonathan.
Howdy, and welcome to episode 93 of In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. In this episode, we survive in an apartment, settle into our new prepper home, and play with our new alarm system. We're your hosts, Aaron, joined by Jason McConnell.
And Jonathan.
And you are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. We have a full house today. We have Jonathan and Jason are both on the show, and I think this is actually a show that a lot of people have requested us to do. We're going to discuss surviving in an apartment, but since it's also relative to Jonathan's life right now, we're also going to discuss prepping as it applies to getting set up in a new home. And
I promise it won't just me be bitching about how expensive it is to do.
But before we get into any of that, we have a very, very, very special announcement. And why in God's name anybody would entrust us with this very special announcement is absolutely beyond me. But Anne, I hope you're paying attention right now. Because somewhere, I think it was Roswell, New Mexico, that we were ordained ministers of some strange alien religion. Yep. But it turned out that was actually a real certificate. We just thought we were drunk and having a good time, but apparently we are real ministers. And we're also the kings of making up all kinds of fake titles. So, with that said, Anne, I hope you're paying attention because Mitch wants you to know that either he's proposing to you right now or he's going to propose to you in the near future. He was unclear about that. We went back and forth, and I probably should have asked. See, you should have gotten better people than us,
right,
to do this. But
we're not good at this.
But Mitch is actually a very active member of the forum, and to protect his identity a little bit, I won't give out his forum name, but he is one of the more active members. And Anne and Mitch, we hope you guys. Well, first of all, we hope she says yes, dude. Because otherwise,
aren't we actually supposed to ask her for him? Yeah.
No, I think he's supposed to ask her. I think we were just. This was.
Are we just doing the announcement? Because that's weird.
I think we're just. I don't know what we're doing. Actually, I don't know.
Come on.
Hey, Anne.
This wasn't thought through very well, guys.
And
will you marry Mitch?
Exactly.
There we go.
We needed to throw those two lines in there.
There it is. There it is. All right. See, Mitch, you should, and everyone else, you should never entrust us with anything of any. Other than coming up with something, completely off the wall, like a rabbit hole horde or
something asinine,
rabbit hole armada,
and even that I wouldn't trust us with. You can trust that we'll probably end up getting there eventually. But,
hey, every bizarre trip we've ever been on, we've gotten there and back, and only minor cuts, bruises, and somehow someone always gets burned, and it's usually
we've only lost one person.
Who did we lose?
And we don't talk about him.
And so who did we lose? Because I don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly.
Shh. We, even the tactical Weimaraner is playing dumb. Or,
exactly.
Well, since he's like 1 million years old, I don't even know if he's awake. I think he's over there farting. It's weird. The older that dog gets, the more gassy he gets. And it's kind of disturbing because when we're in this studio and we have the AC turned off and all of a sudden we're trying desperately not to make faces and noises while we're recording. I don't know why we needed to mix that in with somebody's wedding or somebody's wedding proposal. But.
No doubt. We just mixed in. Hey, Anne, will you marry Mitch? And the dog's farting. Sorry.
So as you can tell, since we've had a week off, we're actually very well rested and refreshed, and for once, perhaps because we've kind of sounded like we were dying lately. And
no, I think it's the ADD back in full swing.
That could be it. That could be it. Because usually when you're so busy, you're forced to focus and get things done. And now that we've got a little extra free time, which was funny, and we can talk about that for a second. But yeah, I woke up last Sunday, the day we usually record, and I freaked out. I had a panic attack because I was like, I have one thing on my calendar for 1 hour, and that was a report that I needed for that I have to turn in every Monday. That tells somebody what we're going to have a meeting about, which I guess is a good idea. But It was very weird for me because it has been a very long time since I have not had at least an 8-hour day, 8 hours worth of stuff on my calendar every day. And so it was wake up and actually went and had brunch with Jen. And then I had to have a funny discussion with Jen, which we were talking about before the show, that it was, yeah, if I'm going to actually make time, that means you're going to have to give up those things that you've done to fill your time with. And it was, I didn't think about that, but that's a discussion.
She hadn't thought about you. Now that she asked to spend time with you, she was actually going to have to spend time with you.
Exactly. Exactly. So that was funny.
Shit.
Which is funny because now I think she might actually regret that a little bit, or wish she'd held off on it. She does because since, we went and we had brunch somewhere and she got to pick the restaurant and it was a place I couldn't stand, but it was her day, or at least that half of it was. And then the other half was kind of, well, we should do couple stuff together that has real purpose other than going and eating brunch somewhere, pinkies out, And so since we'd just done a prepping for winter show, that was what she and I did, is we went around the house and fixed things. And so Jen learned what it is to be my helper on fixing things around the house. And hold this. Can you say it nicer? Hold it. So
wow.
But that was good. You know what I mean? That's part of being a couple, is learning to work together on projects like that, which is not something that she and I've done often, other than setting up tents and things like that. So usually we have our very divided responsibilities that just get done. So it's been interesting, and we now have I replaced all of the motion sensitive lights on the outside of the house. And if anybody's looking at the LED motion sensitive lights, they're like about twice the price, but I gotta say I'm a big fan now. And they're LEDs, so the bulbs are going to last longer. They're going to even last longer than the new fluorescent stupid replacement floodlights. That's the only time I actually do like those fluorescent versions, is that they, as far as floodlights go, they do last a lot longer. But the LEDs last for frickin' ever.
Yeah.
But they are a lot more expensive, and they don't put out. If you're really trying to flood an area with light, I mean, like really, the big bright, talking about getting into like the mercury vapor bulbs and stuff like that.
Yeah, or even the halogens.
Yeah, the ones that, the mercury vapors are the ones that put out the kind of weird greenish X-Files light. You're not going to get that kind of light output out of them. At least none of the consumer available floodlights that I saw. But they are good, and they put out a nice light. It's a little harsh, which LED light tends to be a little more harsh, but it's outdoor lighting. Who really cares? So, but I like them. About twice the price. Hopefully they last longer, but at least I like the concept that I'm not going to have to get up on a ladder every month and change out those expensive floodlight bulbs, which is nice. So any time I don't spend on a ladder is money well invested, in my opinion.
I can argue that.
Especially when I'm asking Jen to stay focused and actually hold the ladder. Or having to tell her, if I get electrocuted, don't grab me. Just let me, I'll fall off eventually, but don't. And then having to explain that, which was good. I didn't know she didn't know that. So,
oh my God.
Yeah.
I didn't know she didn't know to hold the ladder.
Or when not to hold the ladder.
John, it was so funny, man. I knew he was in bad shape, man. He sent me a text message. He goes, I think I've shelled and eaten 20 pounds of pecans. I am bored out of my mind. I don't know what to do. I just had to laugh because I never get a text like that from Aaron, or at least I haven't gotten one like that from him in 10 years.
Yeah.
So when I got that, I just couldn't help but laugh, man. I was like, he finally has fucking free time. Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah, that was one of the other things she and I did, is we have 2 great big pecan trees in our backyard. So we went and gathered up all the pecans and put them in a big bucket, and we're sitting there shelling. And to be accurate, I did weigh the pecans, and it was just over 3 pounds. Post shelling, that's without shell. So you can imagine, I've got one of those giant fire pits on the deck, and I filled it with all the shells. But just how neurotic I am and how not used to having free time I am. I actually spent the time to analyze the anatomy of a pecan and figure out what was the most efficient way of cracking a pecan to get the nice, perfectly halved. Yeah, I know. I have problems. I'm aware of this, and that's without caffeine, or at least with only 1 cup of coffee.
You should do something about that.
This is why I really don't drink soda, because me with caffeine is, and it's like, what was that cartoon movie where they gave the squirrel like a Jolt Cola or something, and then his eyes bug out, but then it's like time stops and it's like he's in the Matrix and he's moving. He's finally, throughout the whole movie, he's like this basket case, but in that part of the movie, he's moving at this like completely normal rate, but the rest of the world around him has like virtually stopped, and he's like moving faster than the speed of light. It's anyway.
I don't remember, but I know what you're talking about.
Totally off topic, and you can tell that we're in serious need. See, this is why I have too much. It's so that I can get rid of all this energy that I have. But so anyway, we should probably do a show that is not just about how to crack the perfect pecan or installing floodlights, even though we've talked about floodlights like a million times. But
perfect pecan is another show.
Exactly.
We got the proposal in. We're okay.
We got that part in. We got that. And Ann and Mitch, again, good luck to you two. Hopefully she says yes. And but anyway, on to the topic that we've been asked to do a lot, which is apartment survival. And part of the reason we haven't done this a long time is that we've never done the show, is it's not an easy show to do, because the expectation is often, or the feeling, at least for us, is that we're going to have perfect answers for things. And this is one of those instances where there really aren't a lot of perfect answers. There's a lot that can be done, but I think the first one, which is what Jason, you and I were talking about earlier as we were coming back from feeding the animals, was that you have to be realistic.
Oh, yeah.
About it. I mean, and that goes to anything in survival, that, unless you have some kind of just crazy, insane, multi-billion-dollar budget, or even a multi-million-dollar budget for your planning. I mean, you get to that, that where you really have very few limitations, but.
Well, like okay, the typical prepper is a bit OCD.
No.
Yeah, toilet paper. That's all I gotta say.
The other thing,
there's nothing wrong with having 3 years worth of toilet paper, and it's the aloe stuff. All right, because you know what? Apocalypse comes, that's going to be my luxury.
Hey, man, I'm just saying. Yeah, but just in particular with apartments, you have to take a realistic look. A reality check. You've got a small space. You're around a ton of other people. Look at what your limitations are.
Yeah.
No, it's we say it all the time, and it's that whole idea of preparing for the most likely scenarios first. Mm-hmm. And in an apartment, that becomes 10 times more critical.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Because, and I think that's the thing that people really, going back to what you were saying about you're surrounded by a ton of other people. In most urban environments, at least you have a little bit of space around you, unless you're in one of those 0 lot line townhouses or something.
Right. But even then, you still have access to green space immediately. Yeah,
I mean, maybe you have like 5 square feet of grass or something to let a dog do their business on. But in an apartment, you really have got almost nothing. It's all communal spaces or whatever. It's, in a lot of cases, paper thin walls. To be honest, I've lived in a garage apartment or studio apartment. I've never lived in what I like to jokingly call a people hive. Mm-hmm. But you have.
Yes.
And you do now.
Yes.
So it's certainly good that you're here, because otherwise a lot of it I would be, there was a lot of stuff I was talking about. I was like, well, I can make assumptions about what you could or couldn't do, but I've never lived in a people hive, so I don't really know.
Yeah, I mean, dude, I'm the country boy of the group, so it's that much more odd for me to be the one that's in an apartment.
Yeah.
But case in point, like my balcony. Mm-hmm. My balcony is lined with pots.
Yeah.
I've got peppers coming out my rear end right now.
That's a weird visual.
It is, isn't it?
And to be clear, you said your balcony was lined with pots.
Not pot.
But I mean, I've tried to make take advantage of any available space that I have to try to be self-sustaining. So I mean, I have a balcony garden, and
for a while you had balcony chickens.
Yes, I did. I would take all the chicks, to take some of the pressure off of Aaron. I would take a lot of the chicks and have them on my balcony, under a heat lamp in a big giant box. I have my little chick hen house and all of my garden stuff. Literally puking green over the side.
It was like a miniature farm.
Yeah, it really was.
Now, to be fair, we didn't let the chickens get to much I wouldn't even call them. They were still pretty much chicks when you brought them back over here, and we actually put them in the indoor cages that we have.
Yeah, the main point was when they could start to fly.
Yeah, because one of them did.
Yes.
Was it one or it was more than one?
No, there was actually two that decided to do the kamikaze thing.
Oh, yeah. But they survived.
Yeah, hey,
surprisingly resilient. But, and I think the other point about as far as the balcony garden is your expectation is not that you're going to feed yourself necessarily from it. It's more about the skill. I mean, and that goes back to a lot of things that we talk about because there's, if you're talking about an urban situation, almost all of us have pretty limited space. So most of what we're doing is more about being engaged in the activity, learning, not with the expectation that you're going to be able to completely sustain yourself from it.
Yeah.
It's no.
Although you can reduce costs that way. I mean, Jason, we all know, and we've all seen it by going to the grocery store. Cost of food's going up. Cost of good vegetables has gone way up. If you can grow some of that, and you can and you can offload some of that from your standard grocery bill over time, and knowing that upfront there's an upfront cost to doing all of it, but over time you can actually reduce your per meal cost a little bit by doing that.
Oh yeah, quite a bit, and that's kind of part of what my whole point of my project is just to see how much I can actually produce off a balcony. With us, starting this whole prep thing, I wanted to, really push the limits of a true urban environment, which is an apartment.
Yeah.
And really see where I could actually take that. It's a whole different world, man. It's funny that, because I didn't know that this topic had been brought up before. And when we started talking about it, I'm like, man, I know this stuff firsthand. My number one thing is, number one, I can't produce enough food to sustain myself. Number two, I have very, very limited space. It's not like I have an extra bedroom to store all this stuff. I've got my pantry and maybe like under my beds. My closet's jam-packed full just of my clothes and my guns. You have to come up with creative ways to store and to go vertical, not just, put a couple boxes of stuff. Luckily I've got 12-foot ceilings in my apartment, so I'm going up.
Speaking to the point about being realistic about things, because you're not going to be able to bug out into an apartment for 6 months or 3 months. I think in most instances you're really looking at a week, 2 weeks, and a lot of that really has to do with your availability of water. I mean, if you're in an area that gets a tremendous amount of rainfall, then there are perhaps some things you could do with your balcony for collecting water, but even that becomes very problematic unless you have rooftop access and some very specialized instances of stuff, which most apartments these days outside of like real downtown apartment living that have flat roofs, that most of the time it's a liability for them to allow anyone to have rooftop access.
All right.
So they're going to have those locked down pretty tight. I mean, obviously if you're good with lockpicks or an axe, which we'll bring up in a little while, you can circumvent that in the event of an emergency, but I think that is the first part of it, is you really do have to be realistic about your expectations of how long can you really sustain yourself in an apartment with the availability of water, the availability of food, the availability of security, and what issues are going to arise because of other human beings in these instances, which is not really the total ramifications of that. I don't think we'll have time to get into today. That's more of a big picture topic. But I guess starting off, we can go into picking a location, and this is just in a lot of ways, this is like picking a home. I mean, if you have the ability to be this specific about it, is to trying to pick an apartment that's near resources, which they do tend to be more expensive because generally you're talking about a more expensive part of town, or it's considered a better view or something like that. So you might end up paying a premium for it. Or, I mean, I don't know. You could end up in circumstances like in Houston, there's bayous all over the place, and that's not really considered an upcharge feature of most apartments. And as long as you're as long as you're high up above that bayou, and you're not going to run into an issue. And people think of bayous, but really they're meant to drain off water. They're not sewage. They're nothing like that. So it's not clean water per se. but it's better than absolutely nothing.
Well, but Aaron, you just made a really good point, though. There are lots of, one of the other advantages of an apartment can be, and based on picking an apartment, you'd have to choose properly, is that you can be high up above. And that, for instance, in a place like Houston, where flooding becomes one of the things that you have to prep for and be ready for, being 3-4 stories above the ground can be a huge advantage.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I don't think if I was to ever go for an apartment, I would never pick a first floor apartment for a variety of reasons.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
It's much easier.
Actually, so many of you don't remember, but there was a big, I know you guys remember, big tropical storm in Houston, Allison, where even downtown Houston flooded. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I was actually on the third story of my building. The first floor of that apartment complex actually did get a few inches of water. And we were that was for like 3 straight days that it was hard to get out and around. Grocery stores were closed. Power went out in a lot of places. But again, being on the third floor really gave me a huge advantage over some others.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I think personally I would choose a second floor. Third floor would be kind of my max because those are reasonable to get down from, especially if you were going to, which we'll talk about in a little while, about using like buying emergency rope ladders and things like that. And I think most of those things really only accommodate up to about the third floor. But I like a second or third floor. A second floor, you could, for most of us, unless you've got really weak ankles or if your bones are brittle or you're dealing with some kind of issue like that, or if you have some kind of physical impairment, most of us jumping from a second story balcony is not going to kill us. We may sprain an ankle or something, but for the most part, that's acceptable. If we're getting away from fire or something else, then that's certainly. So I think, but picking an apartment that is up off the ground, but also near resources. So in Houston, there's Memorial Park, and Memorial Park is loaded with. And a lot of cities have this where I know there's a huge area that's actually pretty famous for, and I can't think of the name of it right now, in California, where people literally go dump off their pet rabbits.
Oh, wow.
And we've had the same thing happen with Memorial Park here in Houston, which is people have, I guess they've gotten tired of them, or they bought them when probably what happened was people bought them for Easter. And then it was, oh, wow, that's actually turned into a real animal that somebody really have to take care of.
Go figure.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like the goldfish that we can just flush down the toilet. So what they end up doing is just turning it loose in a city park. And Memorial Park, around dusk or dawn, it's like this rabid horde of all these different rabbits. And you can tell that these are all domestic breeds of rabbits that come out of the woods and pretty much devour the grasses around the area. So, but I think that's something where you would have really had to have invested the time to understand what the immediate area around a new location that you might be moving to or picking out. What are the available resources? And then there's hidden resources like that may be time of day dependent that you might not see. But the interesting thing is those rabbits are actually all up and down along Buffalo Bayou that runs through Memorial Park and runs through downtown and all of that. But if you actually go to any of the parks that are along Buffalo Bayou, those rabbits have migrated all the way up and down that bayou. So Jen and I have gone to several picnics in the different parks that are north of Memorial Park along Allen Parkway. I know no one knows what I'm talking about except the few preppers that listen to the show from Houston. But if you actually go sit at dusk, you will see all the rabbits start coming out, just like they do in the park, which was interesting. I didn't know that until Jen and I started doing those little picnics, but that was even a couple of years ago. I think we're going to start doing them again. But it's interesting in other people. Well, everybody's going to. I think everybody's going to try. Everybody's going to be out there throwing sticks and rocks. If we're talking about it like a real grid down, like really nasty scenario, I think that's what we're talking about. And that was one of the things that you and I talked about one day, Jonathan, was everybody talked about how, at least in the community, if you go back and you read some stuff about the Depression era, about how quickly game went away, even like small animals.
It's amazing. I mean, they're really, when you really think about it, there's a lot of game out there, but how fast could we deplete a resource?
Yeah. It
would be very quickly. I mean, even, living in Austin now, there's deer everywhere. I mean, to the point where they've actually become a nuisance, and the city has even hired professional hunters to come in and call. Because, of course, I'm not allowed to shoot one in my backyard. But we'll get into that stuff, another time. But the issue is they've become such a nuisance. But if it really became, if it was that extreme a situation where there was no more food available through grocery stores and things, I'm pretty sure that local population of deer that's now become a nuisance would disappear in days, not weeks or even months. Right. And the reason is people are very wasteful. I mean, I think you would find that most people would think, oh, we're a family of two. Let's take out a whole deer and we're not going to share.
Yeah.
Most of that meat would spoil, assuming a true bad scenario like that, well before two people could finish that deer.
Yeah. The one caveat to that I would say is that in most, at least in Houston, in the hurricanes that we've seen, is that when people end up sharing a lot, but that could be a local culture.
And I'm thinking in terms of a situation where people don't see an end.
Yeah.
I think the beauty of a hurricane is, and don't get me wrong, I think especially Houston. So I think Houston better than we just saw in the Northeast, better than Louisiana, better than I've ever heard about Florida. Houston is a city, and I didn't grow up there, so I'm not speaking from this as like I'm the native and we're better than other people. But I think Houston as a city bands together like no other that I've ever seen in the types of disasters that it's faced with. And I don't know what that's caused by. Maybe it's just the way Texans are. Maybe it's just something about the way Texas brings people together, because there really is a pride of being a community like that I just haven't seen elsewhere. And I'm not trying to insult others. I really have been through disasters in other places, and it's a different kind of thing. But the beauty of all those disasters, whether it be Houston, the Northeast, Florida, earthquakes in California, most people know that there's an end in sight. And I think a lot of the prep situations you hear about on TV and everything else, you don't know when the end is.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't know when it's going to be over.
Yeah, because even with Sandy, they're still going through issues up in the Northeast from that, and they're mad.
Right. And I think most people still in their heads are still under that impression of, okay, the rest of the world's still okay, so it'll get back to normal eventually.
Yeah.
And I would just imagine that in a really nasty scenario where people really are taking out animals locally, I don't know how behaved they'd be. And maybe you're right. Maybe it would be like people would band together a little bit more. But my personal belief is that you would see a game like deer disappear very quickly.
Yeah.
Next to go would be, birds, and then squirrels, and then pets.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think for those of you who haven't seen it, the show Jericho, while being unrealistic in many ways, also has a lot of very interesting things in it. And one of the things they do have is that throughout the show, game, even down to squirrels, just disappear. People start admitting, I haven't seen a squirrel in months.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because eventually that's what, it would come down to. And there's so many of us that I could imagine the population very quickly depleting wild game.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's why I have a suppressed 22.
Yep. Exactly. That's what we all do.
Yeah. But I think as far as going back to location, I think putting yourself
I was just going to say one more thing. Since you mentioned Suppress 22, very quick public notice announcement. The NFA division of the ATF has doubled the number of agents to review NFA applications.
I heard that, and I was actually very surprised by that.
Yeah. So, and I know I don't want to make this take up the show or anything, but for those of you who have been thinking about a suppressor and haven't done it because you've heard about the 6-month waits and such, if you wait another month or two for those people to come on board, you may find the wait times go down significantly. That's all.
That's impressive, man.
Yeah. And that's probably something that we'll cover in the next episode, because we're badly overdue for a firearms discussion. Actually, today's show almost turned into that because I was looking at a new rifle. You and I were talking about that in a car ride, Jason. But I think as far as... Hold on one second.
Prepping for Jason's choking in the office.
Right. Sound effects at no extra charge. So, but I think as far as location, all I was going with that is putting yourself in the best available situation. So, yeah, if we're talking about like Mad Max scenario where things really start to break down and you are taking the local wildlife of squirrels and rabbits and stuff like that, then you are dealing with much bigger issues than what we usually talk about. Not that we don't personally think about them. We just kind of leave it out of the show because it's like, hey, let's get the likely stuff first. But as far as putting yourself in the best situation where if that really does become the situation that you find yourself in, that you are ahead of the class and have those resources and the most resources available to you. And especially in an apartment, because in an apartment, going back to, you're so limited by space. You are so limited in your ability to store food and store water and store weapons and things like that, that being able to forage, if we really did get that far along in some kind of situation, that you at least had those resources around you. And of course, you would obviously need the skills to do something with those resources and not be wasteful. But anyway, but I think, we brought up guns like twice in the last few seconds. So I think talking about security from an apartment standpoint is kind of complicated, because you are dealing with safety issues. You would have to be very conscious of what rounds you're using. And by rounds, I don't mean just caliber or anything else. I mean, there are rounds specifically developed to shatter as much as possible and to break down as much as possible in indoor environments. There's fragmenting rounds, epoxy rounds, and all kinds of different stuff like that. And and I think in a lot of ways it goes back to a shotgun being the best idea for home defense. Yeah,
I mean, in my apartment, I have one handgun that's loaded with the porcelain rounds.
Yeah.
Specifically for that, because I only have 9mm.
Yeah.
Well, 9mm are notorious for being able to go through stuff. My go-to gun is actually my Sega 12 gauge.
Yeah.
I've got, triple-aught buck in it.
Yeah.
Because I know that it's going to take out whatever's coming at me, and it's not going to just keep on going through, 6 different sets of walls and killing all my neighbors. I specifically want to, kill the person in front of me, and that's it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm very conscious of that because of the fact that I know that I have thin walls all the way around me.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got to stay conscious of if I actually let a firearm, or a round off, that round's going to travel through quite a bit of an area, and I'm in a populatedly dense, living situation. So I'm going to take out one of my neighbors.
Yeah.
And even there, they make very specific, I know Hornady does, makes specific shotgun shells for 12 gauge that are designed for what they call in-building defense versus some of the standard hunting rounds that are out there. And I mean, even then, there is that possibility. So knowing what, I know that in Houston, most of the apartment buildings actually have thicker walls, but if you live in some of the older places, even in Houston and other cities, you'll find that your walls, a lot of people joke that they're paper thin. And sometimes they really are. I mean, basically, it's a piece of drywall between apartments.
Right.
If that's all you have, then even standard hunting buckshot's going to go through that. So you may want to just consider getting something that's been designed for in-building use.
Right.
Yeah. And there are a lot of handgun and shotgun rounds specifically for that. I don't really know that there's much in the way. There's some stuff that claims for rifle rounds, but I got to be honest, I really wouldn't. That would be an instance where I would not want to use a rifle in an environment like that. I don't care. I mean, I do have some of the 223 ammo I have is specifically for indoor range, so it's a very high fragmenting round. I mean, it basically becomes dust on impact, but I don't know. That's a lot of that's something moving really fast, and I wouldn't want to do it. I'm not saying, and that goes back to as far as choosing a battery. I think there's nothing wrong with having, the traditional survival battery if you live in an apartment, and I think you should. But I think more than anything, if I was going to start off with a weapon, and my primary concern was going to be home defense, it would be either a 20 gauge or a 12 gauge, and go from there. And I think the other thing too is that's going back to storage. That's a lot of preppers want to buy up a lot of ammo. And I think that's another one of those things where you're going to have to be realistic about, your expectations. Maybe your ability to store ammo in that situation is one of the Army storage tens of like the 308 holds. The 308, I just went brain dead and forgot the proper name. But anyway, I think everybody knows the green tens that military use to store ammo can. That's what I was thinking of. I think the 308 ammo can holds comfortably about 125 12 gauge shotgun shells, 2 and 3/4 inch shells. I know that because I recently actually tried it out, and I was curious. I just bought a case of 12 gauge ammo for hunting and stuff like that. But But I think those are the other thing with an apartment, going back to one of the other reasons for limiting is a lot of the stuff you may not be able to take with you. And I think you run a much higher instance of needing to bug out.
Oh, agreed.
In these situations, that's one of the rarities that we say you're probably you're gonna end up with a higher anything over 7 days, and you're probably gonna have to get out of that apartment. And that's an instance where it's a kind of a waste of resources because you're not going to be able to drag around 250, even a case of 12 gauge. You're not going to load that onto your back.
Right.
250 shells of 12 gauge. You're not putting that on your back.
Right.
You know, maybe if it's you and a roommate, and whether that, you know, whatever your relationship to that roommate is inconsequential, but, you know, maybe splitting that up 100 rounds per person. But still, that's not light. That's a lot of weight in addition to everything else that you need to travel with: food, water, and your general 72-hour bag.
This comes right back to the point of, you know, I'm an urban dweller. You know,
Yeah.
I have an apartment, but look at my vehicle.
Yeah. Well, and, you know, and I think that's different.
But you are not the typical urban dweller.
No.
Okay, true. I'll give you that. But I mean, I specifically built out my vehicle for the ultimate bug out vehicle.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I've got 2 tanks, dual batteries, you know, a snorkel. It's jacked up. I've got 23 inches of articulation, you know, on this big old Land Cruiser. You know, I can get from here to Oklahoma City, you know, without having to refuel. You know, I mean, that's my bug out vehicle because I live in an apartment. I know that, you know, in 2 weeks worth of time, I'm out.
Yeah.
You know, I need to get the hell out of here.
But I think that goes back to it too, as far as being realistic and know what your time limitations are, and then having, just like we've even talked about this with homes, as far as when we did shows on bugging out. It's just, I think your time frame, unless you're particularly wealthy and have a very large apartment, and storage is really not an issue, or you're in one of those really dense urban situations where that is just the norm, and that people can't actually afford larger apartments, and at that point they're actually the size of a home, they just happen to be in a high rise.
Right.
But I think as far as, you know, and you and I were talking before the show, because one of the issues that you run into with an apartment from a security standpoint is your inability to alter the physical structure. And you and I were talking through what are some of the things that people could do. And one of those is the simplest one that everybody really should do, whether you're in a home and apartment, which is replacing the screws in the lock and the door lock itself.
The door jamb, yeah. Yeah,
in the door jamb, because they usually have like those stupid 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch screws, and you really should replace them with 4 or 6 inch screws. And obviously you'd want to try to match the screw head as close as possible so that the super doesn't realize that you've gone and started jimmying with stuff. Unless you're in a place that has, you know, just really great, heavy, secure doors, which
very rare.
It's very rare. Even because, Jonathan, even the apartment that you used to have in Midtown was a very nice apartment, but I don't remember the doors being particularly impressive or anything.
Surprisingly enough, that place, the one you're talking about, was actually really good. They were steel doors.
Oh, were they really?
Yeah, they actually were. They were quite heavy, and they were steel doors, which I was. But thinking back to them now, knowing how heavy, because I'd seen those doors replaced too, and it would take 2 guys to carry them up the stairs. They were really good security doors, and I think part of it was a fire code issue with the way that place was built, that they ended up being fire doors. But yeah, most places that I looked at had some really crappy hollow wood doors that, you know, you could punch through as easily as kick through. So I think it was a much different world. But I agree with you. You know, there's some basic things you can do there. But I think security when it comes to an apartment becomes a little bit more difficult. I mean, with a house, like you said, you can make structural changes. You can swap a door out. You can do all those things. Now, of course, the sky's the limit if money has no limits.
Yeah,
of course.
But with an apartment, you are held to a few more strict regulations and codes. But that goes back to that whole picking the floor properly, picking the apartment properly, looking at things and picking the place you're going to rent as carefully as you would pick a place you're going to buy.
That's a very, very good point.
I mean, I think this is the home you're going to live in. And I think from that perspective, really thinking about everything in that place before you rent and going through it and not just going, oh, wow, this place looks pretty because they have fake hardwood floors.
Right.
And I've seen people do that where it's like you come in and the place looks gorgeous and it really is a crap for all intents and purposes. It just, they made it look good for that short period of time. And we all know, I mean, all of us, and Aaron, I know you hadn't lived in an apartment before, but you knew people who had either managed them or lived in them. And whenever you move into an apartment for the first time, it's just been painted. They've usually kind of cleaned up the floors really nice. You know, they've made everything look clean and shiny. And it's really easy to get caught up in that this place must be really well made because it's clean.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sometimes much harder to get over that and really take the door and see how heavy it is by kind of opening and closing it. Knock on it. You know, it's really easy to tell if a door is hollow wood.
Yeah.
Just knock on it.
Yeah.
And things like that. See if it, you know, that apartment that I lived in Midtown, there were actually, from the inside, there were 3 locks. There was a deadbolt that was accessible from the outside. There was a lock on the knob, but then there was actually an inside-only deadbolt that I could lock that actually didn't have any outside accessibility at all.
Oh, you know what? I just remembered. I think I know why that was a very unusual case, and I think I just realized why, because that was a new development in what had previously been an area that nobody went to.
Oh, yeah. I was an urban pioneer with that place, and they built it securely. I mean, even my windows had triple locks on them.
Yeah, this was not an area that you didn't go to at night. This was an area that you didn't go to, period.
Yeah, and now by the time I moved out, it was one of the most expensive areas of Houston to buy property in, but it definitely went through a revitalization that was pretty significant over that period of time.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that you and I, Jason, came up with, which is actually something that my mother did to her house. And I thought the first time she did it, I was like, God, that's tacky. And I still wish she would find a better way to do it. There's got to be prettier hardware in this, and I'm sure there is. But and what are the names of those brackets? Do you know?
Just a 2x4.
Yeah, it's basically, and if we probably should have looked that up before we started recording, but we forgot. So.
The door bar is all it is.
A door bar, yeah. Johnson rod. Door bar. Yeah.
One of those.
I gotta get that fixed. But, you know, I think if you walk into any hardware store and tell them what, and we'll explain what you're about to do in a second, and this is not something that you would put in beforehand. This is something that maybe just have on hand because it is a very cheap item to have on hand. You're maybe talking about $10 worth of materials here. But as far as having this available to you, that if things really did go that bad and you really did have to barricade the door, that you had this available to you in your apartment as something you could use. And it's certainly something you could take with you because you haven't installed it, because you are going to make a pretty large hole in things, or 4 very large hole in things. And it's they're these clips. We really should have looked that up first, but they're basically these brackets that can be bolted into a wall, and obviously you'd want to bolt that into a real structure, not just drywall. So you'd want to hit a stud or a door frame or something like that, and then you would have a 2x4 cut to size, and you put that 2x4 into those brackets that would be on either side of the door, and somebody would have to be coming through with something pretty heavy duty to actually get through that.
I mean, it's amazing how well or how effective that one little piece of wood it is.
Oh yeah.
Because it when you're kicking in a door, it takes those weak points and nullifies them.
Yeah.
I mean, literally you're trying to kick down a solid wall.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think even with the police ramming bars, that would be, at that point you're talking about somebody's going to have to really,
they're literally going to have to take the door frame out.
Yeah.
You know,
which oddly enough I do know how to do, but we're not going to get into how that works. It was because I was hanging out with some SWAT guys one day that were talking about how you just take out the whole wall, and it was like, what? And they started explaining it, and I was like, man, some of this stuff I just don't need to know.
No.
But I'm glad I do. But anyway, but I think those were largely the limitations, because beyond that, you know, other than requesting and really kind of beating up whoever the apartment manager is to really and put a better door on, put more locks on the door, or to put one of those kick plates in that is basically a hole in the floor, and then it's kind of a flat piece of metal with a stem on it, and you stick the stem in that hole, and then it largely acts the same way as what we were talking about. The 2x4 is actually stronger, but they act pretty much the same way. But that's a cheap way that you can have those materials. You can have that 2x4, you can have those bolts, and you can have those brackets on hand, and obviously know you're going to need a drill to be able to put those bolts in. But to really understand how you're going to put that in the event of some kind of really severe emergency. You know, the zombie apocalypse. The zombie apocalypse comes, and you've got to at least batten down the hatch from that standpoint. And that was my other reasoning for being on the second floor, is it's another layer of security, because I mean, people really, whatever the issue is, it would have had to have gone on for a long time for second floor apartments to start becoming targets, because the first floors would have pretty much had to have been completely ransacked at that point, or completely flooded out, or something like that. And obviously we're going deeper into scarier territory than we normally do, but you know, we're only on every other week now, so we can get kind of crazy. I think.
Right. Exactly.
We don't have to stay quite as calm as we usually. Deeper stuff, and there's really not much, you know, in the way of windows. There are some things you can do with windows, you know, even as far as, and this is probably something you'd be really want to be careful with, but going a simple trick for actually locking windows is to take an 1/8 of an inch drill bit, getting the appropriate metal drilling drill bit, unless you're in unless you have wooden frame windows, and then just drilling through the frame of the window. And you can take a coat hanger and break off a piece of coat hanger and shove that into the window, and somebody's really going to have to pry into that. Or you can use a 1/4 inch drill bit. You know, if you've got good thick window frames, and you can actually shove a nail into it, which is quite literally the windows in my bedroom had the traditional old, because it's a very old home, had the thumb locks, and I actually drilled into each of them, and just that's all I did, because I was putting curtains over it, so I really didn't care how it looked. So I just went and bought some nails and just shoved nails down the holes, and those windows aren't coming open. And it's not something that I think most supers or anybody are going to notice, because it's such a small change. It's still something I'd be careful about, because window frames ain't cheap, and if you do get caught, you know, making that kind of a serious change, you know, you could end up being responsible for buying all new window frames in an apartment. That would be kind of suck.
I wouldn't worry too much about that on a second floor or third floor.
I would agree with that.
You know, in all actuality, I would. No one's going to bust out with a ladder, you know, at an apartment complex. You know, be a little obvious.
Yeah, pole vaulting
yes.
after the apocalypse.
And if it's actually truly an apocalyptic type situation,
yeah.
I don't think a piece of glass is going to slow somebody down.
No, I would agree with that.
You know, I just really wouldn't. I personally wouldn't worry so much on that aspect.
It goes back to the whole idea of, you know, really focusing on the likely, and since people are inherently lazy,
yeah,
like you said, Jason, if you're on the second floor or the third floor, nobody's climbing anything to get there. They'll try to come through your front door. They're not going to try to scale the wall.
Exactly.
But I think just as far as offering advice for ways, if somebody really does want to lock something down further than it already is, or if they have a window where they live in a crappy apartment and it's like the locks really are just like non-existent, that's an easy way of fixing that.
Oh yeah.
You know, and conversely, talking about windows and stuff like that, and being in a second floor or third floor, one of the things that we did talk about was the need to be able to escape.
Yes.
Escape from your apartment. And that's one of the things. They do make rope ladders that are designed and they have nice hooks on them. And I think most home improvement stores even sell them, or you can go onto Amazon and buy them. I'm sure we'll find a link and put it in here. There's a bunch of them. I've seen a bunch of them on there. I don't live in a 2-story home, so I don't have one, but there's plenty of them on there, and they're pretty effective in having that at the ready and available, which I think most people should anyway, because I don't think I've ever really seen, outside of like one apartment that was in a high rise and had access to a traditional fire escape. Most apartments really only have one way in and one way out, which is a front door. Like even your apartment, Jonathan, only back in the day only had one door, and there was no fire escape or anything. There was
no fire escape, but I had that balcony.
You had that balcony. On the flip side, somebody would have had to have used accelerant to light your apartment on fire, because that was actually...
Yeah, I was about to say that place was a little different, but yes.
It was all concrete and stucco, so it wasn't going anywhere. It wasn't going up in flames anytime soon.
Right. You know, I'm glad you bring this up. The ingress-regress thing is a big deal, but number one, from a security standpoint, you know, you've got to be able to protect your entrance.
Yeah.
So you've got to be able to somehow arrange a situation where you can actually hold down and cover that door.
Yeah.
Someone's trying to come in.
Yeah.
And vice versa on the balcony. But my favorite escape tool in an apartment actually is an axe.
Well, that's because you like scaring the crap out of people. But actually, I totally agree with you on that. As far as if you can't go out the back and you can't go out the front,
you're going through a wall.
Sometimes the answer is to go sideways.
Yep. You know, in an apartment complex, it's usually not a brick wall. It's usually made out of 2x4s and
drywall.
Drywall. Now, generally, there's a bit more insulation in between those, but an axe, you're in your buddy's apartment or in your next door neighbor's apartment. You know, each one of those of my apartments, go through the actual walls themselves, and actually escape all the way down. If they're expecting me to come out of my door, well, all of a sudden I pop out of a door 6 apartments down. I got a good chance of getting the hell out of there.
Yeah, and I mean that applies for any of these situations, or or after the apocalypse, if you just want to make an expansion,
right?
Exactly. Hey, my neighbor's gone. I'm expanding this apartment.
Right, I'll have plenty of storage space.
Exactly. Then you got plenty of storage space. But I think more really being realistic about it, as far as having that, while extremely unconventional, having a third, at least a third option. Giving yourself that third option, and I keep an axe in my attic in case we get flooded out. I can go through that attic. I can get out the top, which ends up in a lot of flooding. A lot of people get trapped in their attic.
Exactly,
and die of heat exhaustion.
Yes, that is actually a very good point.
I keep a full bag in my attic, a full bag of tools in my attic for that kind of thing, and because you never know. I mean, why not? We're preppers. That would really suck to die of heat exhaustion in my own attic. I'd look pretty silly, and I think that. The other part of it would be picking an apartment, if available, closest to the stairs. If we're talking about a big people hive, like your apartment is fairly close to the parking garage, so you not only have stairs, you have the ability to go into the parking garage very quickly from your apartment, and get away from fire or things like that. And you have an easy trip to and from your vehicle.
Yes. If
you had to load out and get out quickly. And so I think those are things to consider too. I mean, obviously we started off with the dramatic, but it's simple of, what is the position of that apartment relative to the stairs? Unless we're talking about a really old apartment complex that the stairs run through the center of the building and all of the apartments are on the outside and everybody shares one stairwell. But I think the more modern apartments are, how far down the hallway from the stairs are you? And that's also just a matter of convenience in general, moving things in and out. But,
there's another flip side, on a positive for living in an apartment complex, specifically one like mine. I've got long, hallways.
Yeah.
With no other doors, and they've actually got emergency doors on every entrance. Well, if there's a hurricane or a tornado situation, my safest place is actually in my hallway. Going to all the apartments.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, you're not going to get hit by any flying debris in there at all, and you're covered insulation-wise. A full apartment.
Yeah, you've got no glass, none of that stuff.
The parking garage itself, that's like a concrete bunker, man.
Yeah.
My vehicle is perfectly safe in there. Nothing's really going to come at it in there. It's a safe place when you're talking about natural disaster.
Yeah. Right? The real issues, I think, come into play when we're talking about, which since it is, I mean, we are a survival show, so going beyond natural disaster and going into the more dramatic things, that's where apartments really, and I think that's usually where people are really going with it. How do I survive long-term in an apartment? And that's the point at which I say that's unrealistic. I mean, and it's the same thing with an urban, even living in a home environment, there is a length of time that becomes unreasonable. Now, personally, I think that is a window. That there is a length of time that you get to where it becomes very hairy to be in the city. And then there's a window where it's just almost impossible to be in the city. But then I think that window opens back up. But now we're talking about getting really deep into some really far out Fantasyland stuff of how long of a grid down situation we're talking about, where we're talking about the population quickly dwindles back down, or, especially in an urban situation. Because we are, We've always played it back from a standpoint of let's talk about it logically and let's talk about it from a most basic standpoint. But if we start getting into the long-term stuff, yeah, I think things become extremely violent very fast in an urban environment. And then that's one of the problems within an urban environment. And I'll fully admit that, and I'm happy to admit that, or not happy to admit that, but I'm happy from a standpoint of admitting it, not necessarily happy that it would happen. But I do think that would happen. And so in my in my head, there is a time frame that does become very hairy, but there does become another time when cities open back up because you've got huge population dwindling. Anyway, but I think that's it. It's just, really being realistic about it and understanding the length of time that you're going to be able to be in that structure. Mm-hmm. What are your available resources? What are your advantages and disadvantages? And what disadvantages can actually be turned into advantages? Just like you were talking about a second ago with that you have this concrete parking garage where you can park a vehicle up high, where I don't have that availability.
Right.
I have the fortunate that my home, the way this neighborhood was developed in the 30s, that the developer was actually intelligent about it and knew Houston is a frickin' swamp. And the homes are actually about 6 feet above street level, so the streets become canals. Was the right way to design a neighborhood in Houston. Fortunately, most new neighborhoods don't do that. So I get to park my vehicle up a lot higher than most people do, and my home is up a lot higher than most people are. But I still run the risk. I mean, once the street floods, I've got no use. Even though I've got a big truck, it's still a gas truck. It's not diesel, and it's not. I don't have a snorkel on it. So I'm not. I might as well get that canoe out at that point.
Your point there is really valid. It's that whole idea of knowing where you are, understanding what the issues around you are. Mm-hmm. And when you go to that new house or that new apartment or whatever it might be, you're looking at it with the understanding of, okay, I'm in Houston, or with me, I'm in Austin. So for me, I don't think about flooding the same way I did when I was in Houston. I no longer have to consider those things. And I'm in a pretty urban part of Austin now, but the idea that my home is no longer, 6 feet above street level isn't really as much of a concern.
Mm-hmm. Now you just have to worry about the zombie deer.
Exactly. Well, that's why I have balconies.
Right. And or the damn wildfires.
Oh, yeah, you have to worry about wildfires now, John.
You would. So, again, there hasn't been a wildfire in the city of Austin in over 100 years.
Yeah, I think you're good.
So within the city itself, there's not really those issues. But yeah, I mean, the fact, it's nice to know that, I've got more fireproofing than most houses have. I mean, yeah, my wood balcony off my bedroom's a problem. But beyond that, we do understand that those issues do exist.
Yeah. And I think as far as food storage, because we've talked a lot about this, because this is the biggest problem with apartments is your availability of storage. And I think the real thing to understand with apartments is going back to those limitations. Most of us are not going to be able to put in a deep freeze. We don't have room for a deep freeze unless you're somehow going to make that into a weird couch, which I think would be kind of cool. But you could do that. You could totally do that. A little hot glue. Little trip to Michael's, some stuffing and fabric, and you got yourself a couch. You're just gonna, what was it? The guy, I don't know. There was this guy who was flaming, and he had Christopher Lowell. He used to have a show on the Home Network, and it was always like a hot glue gun and a trip to Michael's, and he made anything into anyway. I totally getting off topic there, but it was just funny because all of a sudden I had this picture of Christopher Lowell like turning a deep freeze into some weird tall couch.
The ultimate prepper.
Hey, but as far as doing stuff like that, that's unrealistic. So having a deep freeze and being able to do stuff like that, you're not going to be able to do. And at that point, you really are going to have to look at long non-perishable food items, and you're going to have to look. One of the things that you and I were talking about earlier today was was Wise, who's not an advertiser of their show or anything. They have really good food from what I understand, and it's all prepackaged and stuff like that. And there's a bunch of them. There's Mountain House and everything else. I think the ones with Wise, though, from what I understand, the reason I brought them up is they sell it specifically for that reason, where Mountain House is really more about camping and stuff like that, whereas Wise is really more about survival. And they'll sell containers of the food, and it's like, here's your container. It's one person, 18 days. And it's very easy. Now, you obviously need to look at those calorie counts, make sure that they're not fudging their number somewhere. But I think those are really the options for, and unfortunately, they're not as cheap as some of the other things. But that's where you're at. That is going back to those are limited. That's the world you live in. If you want to be more creative and do that and think, okay, I'm just going to go buy a ton of ramen noodles. That's certainly another answer. And is that whether or not that's the right answer for you is up to the person listening right now to make that determination. But I know the Y stuff for like 18 days is like $100 or something like that, and it's not ideal in my opinion. But there's very few things in prep that are ideal.
Right.
And I think that's going back to the very beginning. And that's why we keep beating up this topic is that people get this idea in their head that they're going to have some perfect solution. And there are no perfect solutions until you get into the really crazy blue sky budgets. And even then there's things that it's like, yeah, all right, I want a ray gun too, or I want a rail gun, a 200 caliber or whatever, or rail gun, but that is just it's not going to happen. The government's going to come.
I don't go less than 110 cal.
Well, I mean, there's a point at which the government's going to show up and be like, "No, you cannot have a rail gun turret on your home. You're blacking out." Jonathan, don't tell them about your rail gun.
I just installed it.
Shh, don't tell people that. And I think that talking about food, that goes to one of the other things you and I were talking about. Is there are under the more reasonable circumstances, there are community barbecue pits. So having charcoal available on hand at all times and lighter fluid and everything else you need to do to do a barbecue with. That's certainly one option. If you're in an issue, if we're starting to talk about much more long-term things, then you're talking about using one of the propane camping stoves. I would never, ever, 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 I know lots of people do it, but I would never recommend, no matter what your building's made out of, doing the barbecue pit on your balcony thing. I just see that as what is it? My mother likes to say, too much sugar for a dime. Otherwise, basically like, it may not be a problem this time, but eventually, something stupid's going to happen and somebody's either going to get really hurt or a lot of people are going to get really hurt or worse. So I just don't see the value in it. But, it's there. And it's if you're in a really, if we're talking about the really extreme stuff, then who am I to say anything about anything, whatever keeps your butt alive in those situations. Including eating your roommate, but that's that goes back to the other conversation we were joking about with the axe.
Yeah,
but
you're gonna need it. You're gonna need it when you butcher your roommate.
Exactly. So, but I think that's as far as cooking. That's the other thing where talking about using the dehydrated stuff is good because at that point it's just a matter of boiling some water or heating up some water, and that's pretty easy to do. In those situations. Now that speaks to the problem, the other problem of storage, which is storing water. And it's back to, you're only going to be able to store so much water for so long. It's maybe you do go buy the 5-gallon Reliance water containers and that's, the very bottom of your closet on all sides. Maybe that's what you do is just fill it up with those things and just, you have to make room for them. And maybe you don't have,
You're not going to have room not in a one-bedroom apartment.
No, I mean, but I guess that's really up to you. You're going to have to make some real decisions. If do you need 10 pairs of shoes or do you need 5 pairs of shoes and 2 water jugs? What do you really need to do? What are your priorities with the space that you have? What are your realistic expectations? And then the other thing that we talked about is most apartments do have a bathtub. And you can, at that point, use a water bob, which I know we've linked to a bunch of times and we'll link to again today. But it's just basically a big plastic liner for your bathtub that in the event of an emergency you can fill up. And that's probably one of the best options you have. And I mean, I'm sure there's a bunch of other really creative ways of filling up large plastic containers, but I guess
it rolled back to the space to store it.
The space to store it. I mean, if you're getting into this situation and you know that an event is coming, then the issue is, screw it. Your living room is full of plastic water jugs, then, and then there is space for low value items like empty water containers and gas cans and that you could store the closets that are usually off a balcony.
Yeah. Sure.
Or something like that. But, and I think that's really kind of the limitations in general with the pluses and minuses of an apartment. And I think now we can really, I know we're running long today, but since we're only on every other week, we can go as long as we want, I guess. But, but John, now we can talk about the fun and excitement of prepping in a new home, which I think is kind of neat because you get a clean slate to do all kinds of bizarre stuff as long as you can afford it.
Right.
Well, and that's the part that becomes really difficult, right? I mean, it's, at least when you've been in a place for a while, you have time to build it all up, and then you move out of there and you move into another place, and it's like, if I really want to do all that here, it's going to cost a lot of money. luckily, you move with a lot of things, hopefully. And I will say the sky really is the limit. It's all an issue of how big your wallet is. And one of the things we looked for multiple reasons when we were buying a house, we really did look a lot for a place with a lot of storage. That, believe it or not, made the search more difficult. I mean, I think a lot of people who have looked for a house before kind of understand that. And Aaron, in your house, I know that you're very well aware of that too, because you're in an older home.
Yeah, I'm in a 1930s bungalow. I mean, people had
it's a great house.
It's a great house, but it's
find storage. I mean, you've got the attic, which is nice. You've got some other areas, but
yeah,
you can't just create it out of thin air.
Yeah, my closets are designed for a suit,
right,
and a Sunday suit, and a pair of shoes.
Exactly, and here I've got closets the size of rooms in my old house. And so that's really nice. And they made best use of space everywhere. I mean, the builder was fantastic in how he used space. So we were able to take a closet that's kind of downstairs and relatively well hidden, actually, because he made use of some space in the house that you couldn't use for living area, but made great storage area. And we've managed to, what we ended up doing is buying some Metro racks, some of those Metro shelves. That you can get them at Container Store, you can get them at Home Depot, Costco usually has them. All those places have some form of basically baker's racks.
Mm-hmm.
And we've gotten a bunch of those, and we've loaded them up. I mean, all our stuff kind of fit nicely. We had an issue with our safe being destroyed, so we're getting a new safe next week. But that's going to go even into that storage area. And it's really created a place that's kind of away, really well hidden within the home, and yet gives us plenty of storage. But I think that is one of those things where as you look for a home, has got to be top of mind. I mean, you got to be thinking about where you're going to put things, because let's face it, I mean, we all want to live looking like things are normal. I mean, most of us don't want to have stacks and stacks of dehydrated food sitting in the living room.
No, we like the stacks and stacks, just not in the living room.
Right.
Exactly. So I mean, our view is we even for us, having all the duplicate, the copy canning and extra toilet paper and extra paper towels and all that stuff that we don't buy one at a time, we're buying in rather large bulk. We want that out of the way, and we want it well hidden so that our home looks like it's just a nice home. And honestly, you don't necessarily, we've talked about this many times, you don't need to advertise to everybody that you've got stores of things.
Mm-hmm.
So that really was and I know for Karen visually, that was a big deal. And for me, it was nice to have the storage for her. The fact that it was out of the way and hidden was a big deal. But I would say if you can get storage, one of the first things we did within the first couple days of moving in was heading on over and just buying some. We priced them out at a bunch of places and bought what we thought were the best racks for the price. So again, using that, we've talked about this many times before too. We didn't go for the cheapest racks. We went for the best value, best bang for the buck, which was kind of somewhere in the middle of price. And we just loaded up this storage area with racks. And that was kind of our start.
Mm.
Beyond that, I mean, there's, like you said, sky's the limit for homes. We've got a battery of defensive tools. And many of you have heard about the batteries that Aaron and I have. But even that, I was mentioning balconies before. I do live in an area of town. Again, I like the urban pioneering concept. And I live in an area of town that hasn't been gentrified completely. And it's nice to know that I've got a second-story balcony that could be used as a defensive position in a really bad scenario. So I think that's the kind of thing that when you're buying a new home, you've got to think about. Beyond that, I mean, quite honestly, it's like anything else. I mean, it's all the other stuff we've talked about. From a security perspective, check the windows, check the doors. The nice part about a house when you own it is if things don't meet spec, it really just takes money to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
Money or being really handy.
Yeah.
You that are more handy, you can order a door online or you can go to Home Depot and swap it out yourself. I am not that handy.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Now, Jason, you are actually much more well-versed in the carpentry area than I am, where my strong suit is a lot more electrical, and reading the structural engineering of a structure. But as far as, that was always the big joke between architects and carpenters. Architects knew how to draw, but they didn't know how to actually build it. And that was one of the reasons in college I actually went out and specifically tried to work for tradesmen. because there is a big difference between the drawings and the process of actually building it. And then there's inherent arguments that go both ways. But, and I think that in a way that speaks to, you talking about being handy and doing other stuff. With new construction, there's all kinds of things that you can do since you're not in the home yet that you can have done to the home before you move in. Like if you wanted some kind of hidden space, or if you wanted a lot of hidden spaces within a structure, those are certainly things that you'd want to. It's a lot easier to have them done before you move in than to try to do them once you've moved in. But of course, that depends on finance and timing and everything else that goes on in everyone's life. But even the having to hold back on certain things that seemed really exciting at the time, like Jonathan, you were talking about, there was the option of doing a panic room when you first moved in.
Yeah, so that, and it was one of those things that I know, even though we're all, especially the group of us here on this line and those of you listening, we all pay attention to prep and all that. I hadn't even thought about a panic room. And the storage closet, like I mentioned, is very well hidden. We were having a locksmith come in and replace or put a lock in it, a quality lock on that door. And one of the things he was saying to us is, this is a great room for a panic room. And so being the inquisitive type that I am, I immediately said, well, why would you say that? And he's looking at it going, well, there's a low area over there, and that's a great place where you can actually go and hide if somebody was trying to come through the door. And he said, because people walk into a room and they immediately look at eye level, and you'd be way below that, and you can defend the position easily. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, this is all really interesting information. And I hadn't even thought of that. You actually can pretty easily, at relatively low cost, replace a door with a steel core door. And I say relatively low cost, I mean that is in terms of relatively low cost compared to the house. And you can replace them with a steel core door and have the frame secured and do things like create maybe not a true panic room like you've seen in the movie where it's steel walls and video cameras and surveillance, but a panic room that gives you a safe place to go for you and your family that you can defend easily, because defending a small space is always bigger than trying to defend a large one. And that can be where your food stores are and things like that. But it's just one of those things that I think a lot of us, even when we're in the community, don't think as much about as we could. We think a lot about the prepping for food. We think a lot about prepping for water. And my house has rain barrels, which is great, because if I had to, I could purify that water using things that I've got in the home. We've got bathtubs in the house that we can use with a water bob. And then, of course, we don't have a hot water tank, which is one more place to store water, but we could actually very easily fill 3 bathtubs in the house and things like that. So we've got plenty of storage for that. And we think through all those things. But then when it comes down to practical application, which to me is what a panic room kind of ends up becoming, we sometimes don't think that far ahead. And it was just one of those very interesting ideas. And I think everybody should kind of take a look around the house and maybe not, like I said, not a true panic room, but where could you go that does create a defensible place in the house for you and your family to very quickly get into and defend. Because sometimes, you don't care about the things in your home as much as you care about the people.
I would hope.
You would hope. I've met people that aren't like that, but I try not to associate with them.
Exactly. And I think that's bringing up panic room and not think about it. It's funny. Going back through Doomsday Preppers, which we've is a popular TV show now, or I guess they say they're popular. I don't know, maybe they're not. But oddly enough, I was expecting a different outcome from Doomsday Preppers. But we've actually gotten quite a few listeners that have shown up here and told us it was actually Doomsday Preppers that, while it's a nutty show and it's overblown in some respects, it has woken up some people. But my point about it is, I don't think in any episode I've ever seen anybody talk about a panic room or having a panic room or having some central fallback location where everybody regroups to. There was one episode where people seemed like they had really not just thought out, but intelligently thought out what positions they were going to take up in their home to defend their home. But I've never seen anybody do a panic room.
And the reason I think that is that a panic room really is about realistic scenarios. I mean, it really is. It's a realistic thing to think somebody might break into your home.
Mm-hmm.
It's a realistic thing, and it does happen to think that a minor situation could happen, that because you can't live in a panic room forever, right?
Right.
Panic rooms aren't going to last you the next 10 years. A panic room is about something happening and you using that room to shelter for a short period of time. And I think a lot of those shows tend to focus on what we tend to refer to as we haven't referred to it this way, but I'm going to do it now for the first time. The 1%ers. Those 1% of the situations where it's a longer period of time. It isn't about reality per se. It could happen, but it's not about reality today or tomorrow.
It's about the long tail dramatic grid down scenarios.
Right. And to me, a panic room is much more realistic. And that's why actually it's one of those things that to me rang very true. It's when I'm looking at the room really, and I've been thinking about it more and more since the locksmith brought it up. Mm-hmm. And it's something Karen and I have actually now talked about. Should we do that? And is this something we want to do? Now, we live in a 2-story house. So for us, the second story in and of itself is defensible. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting. And it really is one more thing to think about.
Yeah.
One of the reason why I think that you never see preppers actually have panic rooms, preppers generally have that mentality of, I'm going to protect generally very well armed.
Yeah, that thought was going through my head too. And not that I'm not placing blame or anything like that, pointing a finger at anybody, that I'm not also going to point at myself. That a lot of us do have that bravado mentality of standing our ground and not running and hiding. At least within our circle of friends that are into prep and stuff like that, it's more of a hold your ground than a fallback. So maybe that's the other reason too, that perhaps we're just not exposed. I mean, there's certainly plenty of preppers that have bunkers and stuff like that, and right. I don't think I know one person with a bunker, but I don't even know where their bunker is, and it's somebody I don't know that well. I mean, you get the idea where
we know strange people. Let's face it,
on purpose, because they're the most fun. But
John, it's funny is in every house that I've ever you either lived in or went in to renovate, so on and so forth.
Yep,
I've always looked at it from a point of, all right, so how if I had to defend that door, where would I be at?
Yep,
and then I look around and I'm like, okay, I can put 1/4-inch steel plate in this wall. I can put 1/4-inch steel plate in this wall, and that'll cover me from front and back from any gunshots.
Yeah, and I will say that looking at the house, that was for me, that was something I thought about with the home of how is the house defensible. Mm-hmm. But I'd never thought in terms of where would I shelter, like a panic room concept. Mm-hmm. Just hadn't thought about it, and not to say that it had never crossed my mind. Like I'd seen I think we've all seen the movie Panic Room. Wasn't a great movie, but still that idea every now and then popped up. But I did think about things like based on the location of the house, general security. Could I defend the front door if somebody came into the house? Karen and I sleeping on the second floor. How would I get to the staircase? How would I defend it? Would I see somebody coming? Things like that. And I think all of that's important. And then even down to, I do live on the second floor. So we do actually have one of those rope ladders that we could throw over the balcony and get downstairs. And that's not necessarily in an invasion situation, but that's even in a fire situation. Mm-hmm. How do I get off the second story now that I'm up here?
Yeah.
So all of that, when we were looking at the house, we thought about where would the food stores go. We really did think about that. We thought about the layout of the backyard and how we might use I know during the hurricane, one of the things that was great for us is we have a propane barbecue. We used that because propane gas in those big tanks lasts a long time. Mm-hmm. That became our cooking source. When I saw, personally, as soon as I saw the rain barrels, I mean, I know Karen, she saw the rain barrels and was thinking, ooh, a garden.
Awesome.
And honestly, that's actually great too. I'm not saying that's a bad thing for the prepping situation. You do have water for your garden at that point as well. But my first thought is I saw these 2 big 50-gallon rain barrels, and I was thinking, that's 100 gallons of water. Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. You can't beat that kind of idea. So for me, a lot of that played into the purchase of this house, in addition to the fact that, like all home purchases, you've got to love the house. You got to want to live there. I've learned since I've moved in, and this is really important, the community around here, I know all of my neighbors. They're all friendly. They've all come by and said hi. I've been by all their houses. They know who we are. And that to me is really important too, because again, thinking in terms of most probable situations, most likely bad thing to happen to your house is somebody's going to break in. Well, if that happens, I want my neighbors to know. I want somebody to call 911 and not just have my alarm go off. But that was also something I immediately thought about, an alarm system. And by the way, I'm not going to endorse it per se, but I am going to recommend you take a look at it. And for those of you either in an apartment or a house, Simply Safe, it's SIMPLISAFE.com. It's an alarm system that you can install yourself. It uses the 3M command strips, so you don't have to drill or anything else. It's all wireless.
Huh.
If you live in an apartment, it's something you can take with you when you leave. It's relatively low cost. You can control the whole thing from an iPhone. There's an app. And we actually ended up doing that in our house, and we love it. It is great. It even has water sensors. So, for instance, we've got little water sensors near our washing machine. So in case there is a leak, we'll know about it immediately. It's got door open detectors. They're even coming out with, I think next year, sometime in the first or second quarter, they're claiming, camera system that'll tie into it as well.
Oh, neat.
Awesome. You know that they've got a cellular call-out function box that you can add to that?
Yeah, no, actually, that's the only way it works now. They've eliminated their telephone line system.
Yeah, they're good.
It's now 100% cellular, which is great. And it can tie into your broadband as well, but we haven't even done that with just using the cellular. And it's really actually quite fantastic. I'm not going to tell you I endorse it just because we haven't, and I don't want to ever actually have to test it. I mean, you know, the beauty of these things is it's an insurance policy and you never really want to test it.
Yeah.
What I can tell you is the install was extremely simple. The usage model is great. Karen and I each have the app. We have a panic button in our bedroom. The alarm on it's very loud. We've got it installed on all of our doors and windows. We are completely up and running with it. And the system took us about 30 minutes to get installed, and that included reading the directions.
Yeah.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, we were actually looking at using, I know that system fairly well. We were going to use those for the houses that we're picking up at the auctions.
Yeah. It's great because you can just remove them when you're ready and you're good to go.
Yeah. They install real quick. You can actually hook it up to a UPS. It can actually be battery operated for a couple hours. Yeah.
Yeah. It's actually a battery system too. So the nice part is everything's got rechargeable batteries in it. So if the power goes out, I think you've got 8 hours power outage.
But yeah, I guess you could. But that's interesting that the system is designed in such a modular, user-friendly consumer way. Because traditionally, it's always been you hire an alarm guy to come out and do wiring and do all this stuff. And the advantage of that is you get real firsthand knowledge from somebody who's done it a lot of times and explain what the advantages and disadvantages of things, and they can point out potential problem areas. Like for me, I have a lot of windows in my kitchen, and where I was requesting to have one of the motion sensors be put would have been set off if somebody just walked across my deck. And I don't particularly want
that's the nice part. They've got layout tools that really help you lay it all out. And they tell you
that's interesting.
How far the distances are. Mm-hmm. So you're right. It almost becomes a little easier to have somebody come out and do it. But if you're willing to do a little bit of education, and this system's relatively new, Aaron. So, I mean, even when you did yours, this wasn't even available yet.
Oh, okay. Yeah, interesting.
So this was within the last year, really. But the Wall Street Journal did a write-up. Walt Mossberg from the Wall Street Journal said if you're going to buy an alarm today, this is the one to go with. And it does really allow you to become a little bit more intimate with your system, knowing how you've set it up.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And when we went through this process, we interviewed a lot of alarm guys. And I mean, if there's an alarm guy listening to the show, this is not a generality aimed at you. This is just a generality of the people we talked to. I got to tell you, I mean, I felt like I was dealing with some of the shadiest people around. And it got to the point where I'm like, I just want to do one myself. So I started doing research on it, and I found these guys. And the fact that it was so easy and relatively low cost. I mean, you own all the equipment, so you are paying a little more up front. But the monthly on it is half the monthly monitoring fee of everybody else.
Oh,
so
wow.
you make back your initial investment on that within that first year.
That's pretty cool. Now, in defense of alarm guys, actually, I ended up using the same alarm company that did an alarm at my family's business, which is that was going to have to be a little bigger than your normal home job, since we're talking about a 40,000 square foot facility. And we had to have a lot of custom stuff done because in instances like that, you're dealing with having your HVAC, the cores stolen out of your HVAC systems and all kinds of fun stuff like that. So we had to have all of the HVAC systems are actually wired into the building's alarm system and all kinds of different stuff going on there and some really custom stuff. But it was interesting because I was able to have them, I had them come into my home and do it too. But anyway, I guess the point is that there are some good ones out there, but at that point you're looking, not that there aren't some really great home installation guys out there, but I think when you get into the commercial end of things, you're probably dealing with a different kind of installer. But I don't want to make generalities, but based on your experience, I guess that.
Yeah, it just, I'll tell you, it just wasn't a pleasant experience. Mm-hmm. And what it came down to was it made me do a little research, which I'm really glad I did, because now that I found Simply Safe, and again, you have to make a determination for yourself as to whether you like what they can do for you versus someone else. And the upfront cost is a little bit higher, but the long-term cost is a lot lower. And to me, the modularity of an alarm system, because I actually went and after we decided to do this little closet, I ended up putting a door sensor on the closet that I was able to set to not trigger the alarm, but to trigger a message to my phone. And that was kind of nice to say, you know what, if somebody's in the home already, they've already either triggered the alarm or whatever. But I do want to know if somebody goes into my closet. And that was, and I don't necessarily need that to trigger an alarm, but I'd like it to let me know. And so I did that. And it's kind of nice stuff like that where you can do things after the fact without having to call somebody. Like at any time I can go onto their website and I think for $14 I can buy another sensor.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's just nice to do, and you can add it to the system really easily. But for those of us, for the prepper in me, it really was one of those things of, I can really do this however I need to, and over time I can adjust it and change it and really make it work for us.
Especially because this is a topic that Jason and I are going to do a show on, and obviously, Jonathan, you'll be included too, if you're available that day, but talking about purchasing and really planning out for a bug out location that your primary intention is as a vacation and hobby property, and if you need it to be a bug out location in that instance, that's what it's for. Right. But that's interesting because that alarm brings up the topic of that is a real issue with vacation land and things like that, is what happens on that land when you're not there and things like that. And what you're talking about is actually something that with a cellular connection, then you could put cameras in place and do things like that easily at a relatively low cost, and be able to monitor your property when you're not there, which presumably most of the time you're not going to be there because it's a vacation property, unless, until you decide to finally move to that location, if that's what you want to do.
Right. Or even to the point where, that some things you don't need an alarm set for, but at the same time, or even if you had the alarm, you also want to know what's going on, and to know that I get that text message as soon as it happens, and to know that kind of stuff occurs. And that the nice part is knowing that I can arm it and disarm it remotely.
Oh, that's
set up temporary codes. So we recently had a maid service come through the house, and we weren't going to be home.
Yeah,
but we were able to give them a key beforehand. But I didn't need to give them my alarm code. I was able to issue them a temporary alarm code that was literally only good for that day, and they were able to use that. And when they left, I just got sent another message saying that the doors had closed behind them. Which was nice to know. And it was just those things of, okay, neat. And the fact that my closet, like I said, had its own sensor on it, I knew that they never touched that door.
That's neat. That's really neat. Yeah, even with my alarm system, that was a fairly fancy alarm system. I have a general sense of where people are in the home because of the way the motion sensors right. But I still have to wait for the call center to call me and start telling me this stuff, whereas you're getting live updates, and that's pretty cool.
Right. And that is one of the things I like. And to me, that was one of those neat things about moving into the new house. It allowed me to go find stuff like that. I love sharing stuff like that too, as you know, and Jason knows. But, getting information like that and being able to be like, hey guys, I found a cool new toy.
Yeah.
Is always fun. And to me, this is one of those cool new toys. And the panic room concept is kind of a cool new idea. Even though it's not a new idea, it's new to me.
Yeah.
And I think we should. It's one of those things that I'd love to do further shows on, like home security and all that, and bring in experts. And if for those of you out there listening, if that interests you, let us know, because I think there's a lot we can do there, and it's something that right now I've got a keen interest in.
Jonathan, we're going to come make some minor alterations to your home.
Exactly. You have to run that by Karen.
Can't we wait till she goes out of town, go get a couple bottles of whiskey, and just do it ourselves?
I don't want to get shot. And she's quite good with a gun. So
this is true. Your wife is exceptional with a gun.
And she's actually quite good with a bow now, too, so I'm not sure which one I prefer.
Well, now she's just going to make it more sporting for her, I suppose.
Exactly. It's just going to be, get out of my house, and I'm going to come chase you. You have 5 minutes.
Well, awesome.
Oh, wow.
Well, gentlemen, it's great to be back on the show, and we ran a little long today. Actually, we ran almost 1.5 times longer than we normally do, but yeah, no, it was fun. It's fun to be back. And now that we're on this every other week schedule, it's pretty fun, and that was definitely an interesting show. And with that, we're going to wrap up episode 93. Thank you for joining us today. In the Rabbit Hole isn't just a podcast and a blog. It's also a community. The best way to connect to that community is by joining me and the other rabbit holers on the In the Rabbit Hole forum at forum.intherabbithole.com. Remember, survival chi starts with community. So come join me at forum.intherabbithole.com and let's talk about all things preparedness. Are you part of the solution? Spread the word about preparedness by reviewing In the Rabbit Hole on iTunes. It doesn't just let us know how we're doing, it also tells others the show is worth listening to. Review us today on iTunes. From the Lone Star State, till next time, stay safe and sound.